Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Wednesday Night Live. Also happy Tu Bishvat. This is a special day in the Jewish calendar. As we have discussed many times, that time, in addition to space, time plays a special role in Jewish life, in Judaism, and the Torah. So usually when you talk about the triad of time, space, human being, what some call time, space, man, especially in modern physics, actually the first time this concept was described is in the book of Sefer Yetzirah, one of the oldest, and some say the first Kabbalistic work, some attributed actually to Abraham. And there, the entire book of formation, there's an excellent translation by Ari Kaplan, talks about Olam, Shana, Nefesh, that everything breaks into three categories. Space, Olam, Shana is time, and Nefesh is spirit or soul. So if you think of yourself as a traveler in this world, you're basically traveling through time and space. So these three play a particular, really in a way, like define the coordinates of our lives. So in Jewish thought, you'll have parallels of things that are in space and time and in the person. And they all feed into each other. For example, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar is Yom Kippur. So that is in time, the holiest day. On that day, the holiest individual of the Jewish people, the high priest, entered into the holiest space called the Holy of Holies in the temple. So you have the holiest of time, the holiest of space, the holiest of the human being, all converging. And the same is true in the Jewish calendar in general. You know, usually a calendar is usually seen as a convenient, an imaginary tool to define our schedules and appointments and so on. And nothing necessarily happens actually on, let's say, January 1st or February 1st. I mean, yes, the sun rises and the sun sets, and there's day and night, but there's no real distinction between one day and the next. In the Jewish calendar, actually, time is energy, and energy is also a spiral. It's like it's not linear, like a flow. It's a spiral that repeats itself, and that's why we commemorate our birthdays and holidays and Shabbat and so on. The question is asked. The Balatai and Rabbi Shneur Zalman Liadi asked, why don't we continue counting at the end of a week? 7 days, then should go 8, 9, 10, and then start 14 and 21 and 28 and 35 and so on. Instead, we always begin from day 1. So most people would answer, that's convenient. You can't at some point you can't say day 5,000 or something. And his answer is brilliant. He says that based on the Zohar, that every day is a form of energy. Sunday has its energy, Monday has its energy, and the energy, the spectrum of energy, just like the spectrum of, let's say, music, that there's 7 musical notes on the scale, there's 7 levels of divine energy, and each day of the week is that energy, and Shabbat is the last day of the cycle, so then Sunday begins a new cycle. So our birthdays, therefore, or other holidays, or any specific days, aren't just commemorative days where you are remembering something that happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Actually, that day, the energy of that day repeats itself. So that's a small introduction that really applies to so many different things. Just as a small lesson from that alone is, many people complain about a boring life, a life of monotony or routine. The fact is that if you realize that every second is new energy, every day presents new opportunities, that's the way one achieve some form of excitement, looking forward to tapping into the new energy of every particular moment and day. And to break it down even further, which is here's not the place nor time, space and time, it actually doesn't just break down by day, but it also breaks down by hour and by minute and by second. That each of these components of time are all different pieces of energy. So, that being said, as an introduction, we are now in the day called Tu Bishvat, 15th day of the Hebrew month of Shvat, which begins tonight and will, of course, go tomorrow. The Hebrew holidays also, the Jewish holidays also begin at night and go into day. For example, Friday night and Shabbat instead of Shabbat and Saturday night. So it goes from sundown to sundown. so night preceding day. So what is this day of the Tu Bishvat? You may have heard of it. Some people call it Arbor Day, the original Arbor Day. In the words of the Mishnah says that there are 4 Rosh Hashanahs. You know, Jews, everything is complicated. You think Rosh Hashanah is complicated. We have 4 Rosh Hashanahs actually. And one of them is, of course, the Rosh Hashanah we're all familiar with at the beginning of the year. That leads into the high holiday season, followed by Yom Kippur and Sukkot and so on. But there's another Rosh Hashanah. So Rosh Hashanah is called Rosh Hashanah Le'ilon. Rosh Hashanah for trees. Why? Because particularly in Israel, on this day is when the trees begin to sprout. I know here we're in the middle of winter, but in the Middle Eastern countries, especially in Israel, it's the beginnings, not sprout, I would say, begin to sprout under the ground. You don't really see it yet. There are different opinions. There are 2 opinions actually in the Talmud. Is it the first day of Shvat or the 15th day of Shvat? But the consensus is, and the ruling goes, that is the 15th day of Shvat. We honor the trees. What do we do on this day? It's not a holiday like a conventional holiday. In the sense it's a work day and doesn't have any of the rules that you usually have on other holidays. But there are some have the custom of eating particular special fruits that you haven't eaten all year. So you make a shechiyanu, which means a fruit that you haven't eaten all year round. So you make it like these special fruits. So you'll find in some homes and schools, they will hand out these the fruits. By the Sfardim, they actually have a whole Seder, just like there's a Passover Seder. They have actually a whole Seder that some do on this 15th of Shvat. And there's other laws and rules connected to the date. But it's interesting that as opposed to the Rosh Hashanah, that we celebrate the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, the famous holiday of Rosh Hashanah, we honor the birth of the human race. As you may know, the Rosh Hashanah is the 6th day of creation. It was a Friday when Adam and Eve were created. So we honor that collective birthday of the human race. But here, what are we honoring? We're not honoring anything human. We're honoring the world of vegetation, the world of trees, which itself begs a question. Why is that? I mean, we don't honor, for example, there's no Rosh Hashanah for animals and no Rosh Hashanah for the mineral world. Why, of all things, is there Rosh Hashanah for trees? And why would we human beings honor it? So, on a very ostensible level, it also emphasizes a big question people have about environmentalism. Environmentalism is a fundamental principle in Jewish thought that we're not allowed to destroy anything. And we hold everything sacred, even the vegetation of the world, even the trees and the flowers and the plants that exist. The classic, the story I've shared many times, that one of the Rebbes, when he was a little child, he was walking with his father. They're taking a walk in a field or in a meadow, and the child ripped off a leaf from the tree and began rubbing it. You know, some people just rubbing it for no particular purpose. And his father reprimanded him and said to him, "What right do you have to go and just disturb the trajectory of this tree's life? Yeah, by ripping it off and rubbing it for no reason, you've disturbed its so-called journey." Just to show you how sensitive one has to be, even to something so trivial, which in general is a principle, especially in Jewish mysticism, that everything is sacred, even the ground you walk on. And there's a statement, they say, a type of anecdote, an expression, I would say, that when a wicked person walks on the street, the cobblestones cry out, "What right do you have to walk on me?" Because everything has purpose and everything has meaning and everything is infused with a certain element of sanctity. So in Jewish law, there's actually a prohibition, bal tashchis. You're not allowed to destroy something for no reason, just to waste something. Nothing, not only among humans, even in the mineral, vegetable, and animal world. You're not supposed to destroy things. You know, just take a piece of paper, throw it in the garbage. It's a waste. Waste is considered a form of desecrating something that's, it's not sacred in the sense like the Holy of Holies, but it's sacred in the sense that it has some purpose. Why didn't you use it for a purpose? So you can say in a general sense, the Rosh Hashanah Le'ilon, Rosh Hashanah Le'ilona, sometimes it's called the New Year of Trees, which is tonight and tomorrow, is a wake-up call that we are sensitive to the world around us. We honor not just the human race and not just the birthday of the human race, but also the birthday of trees. Of course, on a deeper level, we know that without trees, well, some people know, we would not exist. Trees are a very fundamental component to the balance of the world. Trees are filters. They absorb tremendous amounts of carbon monoxide that feeds them, but also filters it out of the air for us. Photosynthesis is a key component in the process of oxygen. And besides the basic things that trees provide us, whether it's wood, whether it's fruits, trees are a tremendous lesson in life. And therefore, when we read into the Torah, you read in the book of Deuteronomy, it says, Ki Adam Eitz HaSodem, because a human being is a tree in the field, which answers the question why we honor it. Because there's something about a tree that is within us. Which leads me to a general principle, just as I spoke about time, space, and the human being, there's another concept in Jewish thought which is called microcosm, macrocosm. Everything that exists in the macrocosm exists in the microcosm, like a hologram. Today this is common knowledge, especially in physics, that everything is made up of the same components. Same subatomic particles exist within us, exist in the millions of miles away in the cosmos, which is a fascinating concept. In other words, as diverse as the universe is, its building blocks are all the same. Not only all the same, in quantum mechanics has been demonstrated that they even sense each other. We know there's nothing seemingly faster than the speed of light. So for example, the spaceships that have been sent out to outer space 20, 30 years ago are beaming images or signals back to Earth. It takes a number of years for us to get those signals once they're reached certain distances. Because there's a certain speed. The speed of light is considered the fastest speed in existence. According to Einstein, nothing can be faster than the speed of light. All the ideas of, for example, of time travel, going back in time, are based on an impossibility, which means you have to travel faster than the speed of light. That's not for right now. But there is something that's faster than the speed of light, and that is subatomic particles sense each other. It's been proven that when something happens in one part of the universe, millions and billions of miles away, it is sensed by other atoms. Which is why you may have heard the concept like the string theory in explaining physics. One of the theories is to explain this phenomenon is that the universe is really one integral whole. Think of it like an invisible quilt with objects on it. So we only see the objects, but there's a quilt. So when you move one part of the quilt, the other part of the quilt is moving immediately. It doesn't need to travel. So light travel means there's one thing here and one thing here. But if they're all really connected initially, then it's not necessary to travel. They already have an integral connection. But that's somewhat of digressing here. Going back to the discussion here, macrocosm, microcosm is the concept used in the Medrash. The expression is Olam Katan Zeh Adam. A human being is a small universe. Small universe is a human being. In other words, we're a universe in microcosm. And Adam Gadol is Hozeh HaOlam. And the universe is like a large organism. So, using another expression as Ha'olam Nasan B'libam, the universe was placed within our hearts. Which means, not just do we have a symbiotic and an intrinsic connection to the universe around us, it's actually within us and we are within it. Now, these ideas would sound very strange and primitive if you're not familiar with modern science. Modern science, this is completely acceptable. 150 years ago, this would have sounded completely ridiculous. Even though it's been written in the Zohar and the Talmud and the Medrash and so on for thousands of years ago, we were already aware of it. But today science has corroborated this concept of microcosm, macrocosm. So in a sense, that creates a far deeper relationship between us and the universe around us. Because there are elements of the universe within us, and the universe is like an organism. And you could compare the two. Now obviously it's not in the physical sense of the word, but yes, a human being, for example, consists of, we don't just consist of one property. We have within us mineral, we have within us vegetable, we have within us animal, and we have within us the human. Mineral, we all know, we have mineral, calcium. Anything made of calcium is a mineral. Our teeth, our nails. Tzameach, which is the world of vegetation, things grow, our hair, again our nails. We have a life force that compares us, that's similar to the animal kingdom. And then of course, what's called medaber in Hebrew, the four kingdoms, the four worlds. And the human being has all of them within ourselves. And the reason it's explained, the reason for this is because we were charged with a mission to transform this world. So it shouldn't be a surprise why we honor trees. We're not just honoring trees for the benefit we get from them, is because in a way, we are a tree, and a tree is us. Now this doesn't mean necessarily in the literal sense. It means that there are properties in the trees that remind us about ourselves. And you don't have to look far. All you got to do is look out your window at a tree, and you can learn lessons about your life, about our lives, and how to align your life and be a healthier life than it is right now. We'll discuss that in detail in a few minutes. So that type of connection to the universe is a very fundamental principle. It brings to mind something I've shared many times. In the Mishnah, in the Talmud, there's a question asked. It says that when Adam and Eve were created, they were created individually. As opposed to the other parts of the world, and animals were created in groups. They were created in herds. Plants and minerals were not created individuals singularly. They were created a multitude of them. Why was the human being created yechidi, individual? The fikach nivra adam yechidi. So the Mishnah says, because a person should know the responsibility they carry, and have to always, chayav adam, a person is always responsible to say, the entire universe was created because of me. In other words, you can't say, hey, I was created with an entire group. Hey, what are you looking at me? Look at someone else. No. Each of us carries responsibility for the entire world. I mean, it's a tremendous lesson in responsibility. You know, one of the things we always say, 1 second, what do you want from me? Someone else is doing it. You know, the metaphor they tell about it, the example they tell of the king was coming to visit a small peasant town, which was like a once-in-a-lifetime gift. So the people in town wanted to prepare a special gift for the king. But they were poor, so what do you do? What do you give the king? So they decided they'll do something, he'll appreciate the gesture. They decided they'll put a large barrel middle of the town, and each person in the town would come and pour a bottle of wine into the barrel, and then they'd give the barrel to the king. Obviously the king doesn't need their wine, but it would be a beautiful gesture knowing a poor town, they did something of value, they gave him this wine. Now, a bottle of wine for people in this town was not a small matter. So the smart Jews in the town said to themselves, well, one person said to himself, hey, everybody's going to be pouring wine into the barrel. Who will really notice? I'll just pour a bottle of water. The problem was that every Jew in town was the same smart. Everyone thought of the same thing. So they ended up giving the king a barrel of water. Because everybody poured water. They said, you know, what's my little bottle going to make a difference? Well, that's exactly what this Mishnah is saying. Every human being, it carries the load of the entire world. This is not meant to cause arrogance, not meant to cause us to be overwhelmed. On the contrary, it means trust. You're trusted with the world that you were given. It's a fundamental trust. But then the Mishnah continues and asks the question, so why was a human being created last? If that's the case, if we're the crown jewel of the entire universe, and the whole entire world was created for me, so why were the human being created last? Because in the account of creation in Genesis, you find day 1 was the creation of light, day 2 was the separation between the higher and lower waters in heaven and earth, day 3 was the creation of vegetation, trees, and grass and flowers and so on, plants, and day 4 was the creation of the celestial bodies, day 5 the animals, fish, the sea, and day 6 the human being, and also animals. So why was the human being created last? So the answer given, the Talmud, the Mishnah says 2 answers. One, because, using an example, when you invite a special guest to the table, first you set the table before you bring him to the table. It's not respectful to put a distinguished person at the table, and then start setting the table. So God first set the table, created the whole world in all its glory, and then brought the special guest. And then the Mishnah gives a second reason, which seems to contradict the first one, and says, why last? Because should a human being transgress, and behave immorally and unethically, he should know, don't think you're someone special, because even a lowly insect, even a yutush, even a small index preceded you. Because even a small insect was created before you. So the obvious question is, which one is it? Are we the special guests that the entire world is created for, or are we even lower than an insect? And the answer is very simple. Depends how we behave. So think of it this way, visualize this. You're very thirsty, you're hungry, you're walking in the woods on a nice, beautiful, warm summer day, and you smell the fresh apples, an apple tree. It could be any fruit. If you don't like apples, just replace it with some other fruit. And there you go. You're so thirsty, so you have three options here. You can either choose to ignore the apple and just move on. You can just grab it and indulge in it and just satisfy your thirst and hunger. Or, and this is what the Torah is saying, or you can see yourself elevating this apple to another place. What does that mean? Eating the apple with a certain measure of respect and knowing that the energy you gain from this apple will be used for something positive and constructive. And here's the Torah's perspective on this, especially the Kabbalistic one. And that is, we have no right to touch anything in this world. Not a tree and not a mineral. What right do we have? Only if we do something with it that will elevate it. So if a wicked person or someone eats the apple and indulges in it and then uses the strength or the energy you gain to hurt somebody, the apple has a complaint to you. What right? I was hanging peacefully on the tree, not disturbing anyone, and you've taken me now and made me part of your cruel behavior, your selfish behavior. On the other hand, if you use the apple and you eat it and the energy is used to help somebody, the apple will thank you because you've used me now to something I could never have achieved had I remained on the tree. I have now become part of helping making the world a better place. So that's what the Mishnah is saying. It depends how you behave. If you behave in a responsible way, so you're the special guest that comes and elevates creation, existence. And if you behave in an immoral way, then you were even lower than an insect, because the insect never transgressed, and you're causing the world to transgress together with you. So it's a take in general when you look at nature, and we look at the world around us, we're responsible for it, but we're responsible to elevate it all. But that's in general terms. More specifically, what is it that we can learn from a tree? So, if you consider yourself a perfectly healthy human being, then you can leave right now. Actually, you wouldn't probably be here if you were that way. Neither would I. What do I mean by that? Because then we'd be completely content and there's nothing more to learn. The fact of the matter is, especially as adults, we all have our measures of our challenges, our issues. Some of them take on shape of just milder stuff, and some of it's more intense. Challenges in the areas of relationships, challenges in the area of our own self-esteem, and personal sense of self, and confidence, and so on. I mean, the list goes on. It's amazing, but this little small human being, 5-6 feet tall, that weighs 100, 200 pounds, can contain so much complexity that, just look at your own life. If you think your life is complex, how could so much complexity exist in a small little person like that? But our minds and our hearts and our nightmares and our whole beings can turn into this complex maze of confusion. And life was far more simple, obviously, a long time ago when we were young children, little children. And it gets more complicated as we grow into adults. So one of the best things in any type of healing or any growth or improvement, I'm not suggesting only dealing with negative things, but even growing in any particular way, actualizing your potential. One of the ways to do so is by finding models in life that are healthy. So looking at a tree actually can teach us about ourselves. As I said, a human being is the tree in the field. And every component of it can tell us a lot about our own lives. So let's define a tree. Obviously a tree has many, many components, much more than we can even imagine. A simple tree. Let's talk about, first of all, the tree itself. So the tree is made up of, we'll start from the bottom up, roots. Right? The tree has roots. Most of us don't even see the roots. You just see some trees, the roots are exposed a bit. But if you ever see the full roots of a tree, you'd be shocked. The roots can be even larger than all the branches in the tree. And they can be hundreds of yards, even sometimes miles. Roots. These roots embed themselves in the ground. And as we know, when a sapling grows, first there's the initial root goes downward into the ground. And then there's what's called lateral roots that start growing out, like branches. The role of the root is to find sustenance. This is where the tree gets its moisture, its liquid, its water that it absorbs. The roots actually have an intelligence to them. They will seek out water. They will grow until they will reach. They're looking for water. You know today, for example, in a city like New York where there's concrete, these roots can destroy concrete because they're continuously looking, especially if you starve them. They will continue to grow. They can destroy foundations. They're very powerful. So that's the root level. The next thing we know about a tree is its tree trunk. There's a trunk. Then come the branches. And then come the leaves. And if it's a fruit tree, the fruit. All this one tree. But it's more complicated even than that because the tree has many other elements to it. For example, the tree's experience of the seasons. It's itself poetic. The tree blossoms in the summer, goes to sleep, starts to go to sleep as it sheds its leaves in the fall, in the autumn, then goes into total like hibernation in the winter, like now, and then only to be reborn again in the spring as it begins to grow, re-blossom again. Yeah. So it's a tremendous lesson in that, which we'll soon discuss in the transitions. A tree, as it goes to sleep in the winter, can survive serious blizzards, snowstorms, ice storms, and remains intact. It has ability, has that resilience. And at the same time also can go through the hottest seasons of all, the heat, and also remain intact. Now it's true there are trees that are much more sensitive, especially certain fruit trees that will not survive in certain bitter cold and frost. But many trees have that ability to be able to just go through it all. Then of course there's the benefit trees serve us. Trees serve shade. They provide shade and shelter. Trees are the habitat of literally millions of different species that either live in the trees or feed off the trees. So trees are, even though it sounds like almost a little innocent bystander in our world, it happens to be a very integral part of it. And most of us ignore them. Today's a day when we don't ignore it. We recognize the birthday, the new year of the trees. And its lessons, as we shall see, are tremendous. Literally can illuminate for us elements in our own lives and learn how to adjust, how to improve, how to better our lives. So let's start with the basic structure. In our own lives, we too need roots and sustenance. We need a trunk, a solid trunk, which is like the foundation. We need to branch out, leaves, and fruit. All these lessons, all these are critical components to life's success. If a person is lacking roots, what happens? You see, God forbid, you see situations, children, for example, that lost their parents, or adopted, or any other way that their roots are somewhat obscured or confusing to them. It has deep impact on a child, and later as an adult. Because everything needs a root. You have to know you come from somewhere, and that you're embedded in a strong grounding, and those roots are your sustenance. Who provides us early sustenance in our earliest part of our lives? Our parents, who love us. It's like nurturing. They're watering us. No different than the roots that look for water. The roots are an interesting thing with the tree's roots. It's a whole network. It's not just one root. It's a network of roots that grow in all different directions, all looking for sustenance in a very efficient, quiet way. So we can look at ourselves. What kind of network of support do we have? Where are our roots? And it's an interesting way to look at things. You say, okay, one second, some of us look like mighty trees, and we seem very accomplished, but when you cut beneath the surface, you may discover that your roots are very weak, or very negligible, or almost non-existent. So that may sustain you for a little while, but ultimately, you're missing a critical component. The fascinating thing is that even though the roots are beneath the ground, the roots also are the reason that the tree grows. So they say that the only thing that grows in two directions at once is a tree. Nothing else grows in two opposite directions at once. The roots grow downwards as the tree grows upward. The deeper the roots, the greater the fruits. That's an original little poem. Still needs to be developed. So the roots, even though, as I said, they are invisible to the naked eye, don't seem so obvious, but they're like the foundation of a building. So then we go to the other extreme. A tree also has the element of a trunk, a solid trunk. Trees are known for their solidity. A strong tree does not get destroyed in the storm. It sways, it's resilient, which we'll soon discuss, but it withstands. And then a tree grows outward, which is an interesting lesson in life. You know, I'll use the example, let's say, in personality types. You often ask people when they're looking for a soulmate, what would you prefer? What kind of person are you looking for? Do you want someone who's very reliable, like a clock, consistent, predictable, all that? Or do you want someone that's spontaneous, adventurous, and so on? Now, each has their qualities. Of course, everyone answers, I want both, but we'll get to that. Each has their qualities. People who are adventurous, spontaneous, and have that type of excitement, sense of excitement, are often very unreliable, unpredictable. When you need them, they're not there. On the other hand, the predictable one is very reliable. You can always know exactly where they are. You know that they'll be there for you. But there's no sense of excitement. There's no adventure. There's no free abandon. So in life you find there are these two personalities. There's more of a clerk type of personality, like a clock. Always on time, a word is a word, a promise is a promise, everything is perfect. Often at the expense of not lacking that spark. And then you have people who have the spark, but they're lacking consistency. You know, sometimes you can call, one is like the sun personality, one is the moon personality. The sun is a consistent glow of light. The moon is always going through phases and changes. It's moody. So you don't have to answer, but ask yourself the question, which do you prefer? If you can't have both, the best of both. You know? Now, of course, the dream would be, why can't we have both? The answer is you could, but you don't find it often. One is usually at the expense of the other. In a tree, you see both. On one hand, it's a solid tree, it does not move, it's very consistent, it stays steady, but it's always growing. Its branches are continuing to branch out, it's continuing to grow. The reason for that is because its solid foundation allows it the security to grow. Well, sometimes when you see people who are very adventurous and they run from one thing to the next and spontaneous, it's not necessarily because they're so lively. It could be they're terrified of staying in one place too long. So they look like party animals, they're always moving about, they're just terrified of being alone. You know, sometimes you have people who are very consistent and predictable, not because they're so steady. Also the same thing, it's fear. So they stay safe. They're always doing things exactly the right way. They're never, always a goody-goody, always a pleaser, never waver. So the mere fact that something is steady or the other thing is moving doesn't mean they're both healthy elements. That means they're just the two personalities. What a tree tells us is that they're not a contradiction. A very secure person who has their foundations in place actually has the license and liberty to explore. The greatest explorers are the ones that are fearless. But fearlessness comes with a sense of security. Think of it this way. A bird cannot fly far if it didn't have the early years of protection and its nest. You don't have a nest, you're not going to fly. So you need a stage where you're in your nest, nurtured, protected, build strength and courage and confidence, and then you fly as far as you can. You always know you have a nest to come back to. People who don't have a nest may look like they're flying, and they may actually fly, but they're not flying securely. So it's interesting, a tree tells us that both the solidity, its firmness, and the same is actually what feeds its growth. So it's a key principle in our lives. You know, people say, one second, I want to be adventurous. There's certain things that should always be unwavering. We all need to have foundations. As I said, roots, a trunk that are unwavering. You have to define what they are. That does not mean that there isn't room for great growth and exploration and adventure and so on. You just have to know that the spontaneity should not be in the areas of the firm foundation, and the foundation should not be in the areas of the spontaneity. They each have their place to be there. So when two people really love and trust each other, on the contrary, let them explore anywhere. They can do anything. They can go and take on the world. If they don't trust each other, if the foundation is not there, the roots are not there, they will not really be able to explore. It'll somewhat be a type of time to compensate, but it won't be the true free spirit that is a result of having secure foundation. And that's what a tree is. Look at a tree, majestic trees, oak trees, maple trees. They're majestic. They grow out, without free abandon. But they always know that they're rooted somewhere and they're grounded. And same thing with bearing fruit. Same next step is fruit. What's the beauty of a fruit? Is that it becomes perpetual. No. It's one thing you have a student, you're a teacher and you have a student. It's another thing when that student becomes a teacher in his or her own right and also has students. That's why the Talmud says that a grandfather or a grandmother reaches a certain level. The crown of the grandparents are their grandchildren. Why? The beauty of the grandparents. Because the Talmud says, in Baba Metzia, the Talmud says that when something hits a third generation, you know for sure it will never end. So you plant a seed and something is born, fine. But if that thing plants a seed and something is born from that, then you know it has perpetual, because it's no longer dependent on you. Which is what the beauty of becoming a grandparent. I wish that upon everybody here, to first be parents and then grandparents. It usually works that way. I don't think it can work the other way. So, because what happens is, that's what fruits are. Fruits have that element of a perpetual impact. There's nothing like that. The joy of knowing, you said something to someone a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and then you hear that word you said to them, that line you said, bore fruit. Something happened. Most seeds we plant we don't usually know of what kind of fruit they bear. But once in a while, God is compassionate and allows us to see the impact we may have had. Not in order to get to our heads, but to appreciate, to see that power. And there are very few things in this world that have more pleasure and more type of power than that, because it's like the taste of eternity. That's what a fruit is. A taste of eternity, that you've planted a seed, and that seed in turn has grown into a tree. So that's what grows out of when one has solid roots. But if you don't have the solid roots, solid foundation, no tree can bear fruit. If the roots begin to deteriorate, you will not be able, the rest of the tree will also ultimately deteriorate. It may take a little time, but the key to that type of growth, the key to perpetuating is all based on that solid foundation. So you have a few lessons right here, without even going further, which we'll do, of lessons from a tree. Looking at our roots, looking at our solidity, our unwavering, what are we completely committed to that we know we'll never waver from, we'll never compromise, our integrity. And then, of course, the other side of the coin, which is the growth, exploration. It's sad to see, but everybody here, everybody you meet, has far more potential than you can ever imagine. But we often are so crushed and so, what's the word, coil up within ourselves, like the fetal position, that we don't let ourselves spread our wings and spread out like a tree. Imagine a tree is forced to live inside of a little box. What would happen? So a tree would continue to grow. It would basically burst the box open. But let's say if the box was too powerful for it to break open, the tree would die. At some point, it wouldn't be able to. It's a sad thing to think of. And a tree is not only a tree; it's not even a life, in the sense what we call human life. So think of yourself the same way. We live in our boxes, and those boxes include our fears and our emotional insecurities and things that may be rational or irrational. Some things are imaginary, some things are real. One big mess. And those thoughts and feelings basically lock you up. So instead of spreading out, think of a newborn child. A newborn child, even a young child. Newborn is still newborn. But look at a newborn child's eyes. Look at that newborn child's movements. And then when they begin to crawl, it's like a tree. It's going everywhere. I understand it's not rooted in the ground in the physical sense of the word, but the child's not going to crawl out of his home. So everyone has the roots, but the exploration. And then things happen. We start to slow down. We stop being so curious. We stop being so exploratory, adventurous, spontaneous. It's usually due to the lethargic adults around us that teach us how to slow down. When I say slow down, obviously we don't want to be 15-year-olds still crawling around the floor, but the curiosity. You know, one of the things that is beautiful about a person, and it's sad when we lose it, is curiosity. The ability to dream, to imagine, to think of things, crazy things even. Because that's very much a part of the spirit of the tree that's reaching out and spanning, the reach of its span as it branches out and also bears fruits. So that's another thing to look at. So each part of the tree is a lesson in our own lives. Obviously, I'll soon address what we can do when the situation is in an unhealthy way, but we'll get to that. What else is there about a tree? I said the leaves. So the leaves, as we know, they protect the fruit, which a lesson of that is pretty obvious. You know, a fruit can be damaged by the sun. It can be damaged by cold. It can be damaged by insects. The leaves are protectors, like garments. Think of them like garments. As a matter of fact, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, it says they cover themselves with leaves, fig leaves. So leaves are protectors, which is another component, especially fruit and other things that are fragile, require that element of protection. So we have here basically a tree, and all its lessons teach us many, many things. Let's go now to the resilience of the tree and the seasons. The resilience. How many of us are able to just make it through every type of season? And I don't mean physical seasons. I understand we survive the winter and the spring and summer and autumn and the fall. But I'm talking about psychologically speaking, emotionally speaking. Many of us like our comfort zone of a certain way. You change the climate or the atmosphere that you're in, and I mean that metaphorically, we get unnerved. We get sometimes demoralized even. You know, I mentioned a number of times, when you go to a party or you go to an event, who do you gravitate to? People you know or people you don't know? So I once mentioned these two options. Someone said there's a third option. I don't gravitate to anybody. I just sit in a corner by myself. Okay, I didn't consider that. That's another third option. Okay, so people will say very quickly, I always gravitate to people I know. Immediately, everyone knows the answer to this question. And some gravitate to people they don't know. The distinction is, the reason for that is pretty obvious. Usually you gravitate to people you know because it's safer. People you don't know start a new relationship and so on and so forth. So I'm not talking about someone who's a salesperson by nature who's always looking for new clients. I'm talking about just simply socializing. This has a lot to do with your own personality. Do you spread yourself out or do you close yourself in? And again, I didn't suggest that one or the other is the healthiest thing. They both can come for unhealthy reasons. They both can come for healthy reasons. There are people that are very healthy times, that healthy people who at times need to be alone. There are people who at healthy times need to be socialized and connect to others. So a tree is a symbol for these things as well, because a tree has those two elements as well. It is, as I said, its roots, but also spreads out. And going back to the resilience is always a result of feeling secure with any environment. I mentioned a number of times, for example, what defines a good swimmer? A swimmer. A good swimmer is not someone necessarily who knows how to swim against every tide and storm. No, a good swimmer knows how to ride the waves. Now when a storm strikes and you see the tide going against you, a good swimmer will immediately stop swimming. They will not exert and expend valuable energy on fighting something that's stronger than them. They'll immediately float allow themselves to be carried. Then when it calms down, and then they're ready, they can do the forward thrust. And you'll see and with all people who find balance in life, you'll find this, how they deal with these storms. Some just fight them. And you could think, hey, that's very commendable, very noble. Yeah, but it's also very unwise. And you expend very valuable energy, and you don't achieve anything anyway. And usually it drains you. So it's really important to know when you go through your life, we all have the winter of our lives, we have the summer. You know, the winter is usually a metaphor for the darker, colder, lonelier times in our lives. And then we have the summer. The summer is the expansive time. Like with a tree. What happens with a tree? When do you see it spreading out? The leaves, the branches, you see it in the summer or in the spring when it begins to. In the winter, the tree humbly goes back into its own little shell. It sheds everything. It goes literally back into a position that it should be able to deal with the cold winter. Now, the tree remained stubborn and wanted to stand strong in the winter, it would be destroyed because the winter is too strong for it. Instead, not only is it wise to withdraw, but something happens. If you know some science, you'll know that the tree in the winter stores up valuable and very critical reservoirs of energy that it will later use when it begins to blossom again. So the winter, if you appreciate it, even the lonely, dark, cold nights and days of the winter can end up becoming a source of a lot of energy if you know how to use it. In Tanya, for example, he explains that there are two types of personalities. This is what's called a marash chayra. Literally means a person with a darker disposition, darker mood. You know, people who have a little more somber, a little more maybe a little depressed at times. People who have a pessimistic attitude to things. Doesn't necessarily always mean a terrible thing. It depends on what extent, but their personality is far more like that. Then there's a thing called Mara Levaina. Shchayra in English means, in Hebrew means dark. And then there's Mara Levaina. Mara Levaina is a disposition. If Shchayra is dark, Levaina is white. A light and whiter disposition. A disposition of certain lightness of spirit. Is not that intense, not that brooding. That's the word I was looking for. Don't brood as much. And there's two different personalities. Now, any personality when it goes to extreme is usually not healthy, but two personalities. So the Alter Rebbe says that when a person who is in that type, a person who's in that mood, or is always that way, they should use it out toward immersing themselves in study, in philosophical thought, immersing introspection and so on, because that's their personality. So there's a certain quality to brooding that can turn positive if you use it well. Is the ability to think things through, the ability to apply yourself. For example, there's an expression in the Talmud, there's a story, the Talmud talks about the seasons. The end of this chapter, the tractate on Tainus. So it talks about the seasons. So it says, after Tisha B'Av comes a day, which we talked about here, called the 15th of Av. 15th of Av is considered to be the last day of summer in Israel. It's when the nights begin to get longer and the sun begins to get set earlier. Only by a few seconds, but that's when it reverses. The days get longer till that 15th of Av, 15th they start getting small. So we know day and night in a way is almost like summer and winter. Day is a time where we're awake, where it's bright, where there's a certain uplifted spirit. Dark usually connects to more somber moments. Darkness, people go to sleep. It's a quieter time. It's a lonelier time. So you would think, okay, so one second. So dark, you think is a metaphor for bad things. You know, that's where you have, when does the werewolf come out? At midnight. You have Dracula. You have all the horror stories always happen at night. Dark, it's dark. Because in dark you can't see, so the monsters come out in the dark. And light and day would be a metaphor for brightness, for joy, for so on. It's not that case. Night can be seen two ways. I don't know about you, but there are different people who are some called nachtveglich, you know, night birds, night owls, they call them. They burn the midnight oil, they call it, right? You know, some people, they just like to work at night. Some people want to go to sleep early, wake up early, and they love the early dawn hours. I don't know if this is always purely by nature, it could be nurture as well. cultural, what you've seen. No one's really established whether this is innate or not, but definitely two different types of personalities. And of course, we have to add the third personality that doesn't like either of the two. But that again is like that's another story. But you have the two different personalities. Night, the people who really like night will tell you, I love it when the whole world is asleep and I can just work. It's quiet, the phones don't ring, the outside is quieter, everything is slowed down. Some people say the opposite. The early hours, especially in the morning, you wake up, you're fresh. Now we also know physically. This isn't just psychologically, this is also physically. The body goes into a certain state at night. Things slow down, which is the whole idea of what we call, when you fly and you have, what is it called? You fly across the world, many out in different time zones. Jet lag. Yeah, that's the word, jet lag. Jet lag. So one of the solutions they say is to be out in the sun more the days, because it's about your body is adjusting to the night and suddenly thinks night is day and day is night. So these things are also physical. They have physiological impact. So you could see day and night as those two opposites, or you can see it as actually both positives. So the Talmud says a fascinating thing. It says when the night begins to get longer, you should begin to add in the study of Torah. Because the night was not created only for one reason, for you to study. Because night is a good and conducive time. So you can see the night as darkness and challenge and as a negative, or you can see it as a positive. This is what we learn from trees. They adjust to the season. Comes winter, you don't fight it. You don't say, you know what, I don't like winter, I'm going to turn it into summer. No, it is what it is. And you try to use it for what it's worth. It has a lot of qualities. The qualities, yes, it's cold, fine. So you find ways to warm yourself. It teaches you how to warm the cold. That itself is a lesson. The elements, as I said, the nights are longer, using the night. So it's like going into a state of a more hibernating state perhaps, but it's a time to build resources. Any business people will tell you that in times when business goes slower, you don't look at it as necessarily a negative. That's a time where you can review your business, where things are slowed down, and introspectively, and build for the time when you'll then expand. So the tree teaches us the lesson of not fighting the tide, not going against the tide, going with the flows, like the good swimmer, and appreciating each stage of your life for what it is. That alone begins to tap the energies that are sometimes negative, if you know how to ride on it and use it for your benefit. Like, for example, if a person's miserable, and I'm sure none of you have ever heard that word before, or concept, right? If you're miserable, you feel desperate even. So these words, miserable, desperate, despondent, hopeless, pessimistic, are usually not positive words. And I'm not suggesting they are positive. Feeling like that is not a great feeling, to put it mildly. But there's something about it that is powerful. It's inverted energy, like pain. Nobody wants pain. But pain is one thing for sure. You're awake and you're feeling it. It means your nerves are working. Desperation, when channeled properly, can end up being a great catalyst for the greatest growth. Because people who are not desperate usually don't achieve anything. The challenge is, how do you turn negative desperation into positive desperation? I tell people, for example, we live in New York City, we have the mecca of single life in New York City. And people are singles. They're singles, they're serial singles, like serial murderers, perpetual. And at some point, many people say, time to meet my soulmate. But it doesn't come that easily. And the question you always have to ask somebody is, okay, and I always ask this question, one of the first questions when someone comes to me, talk to me about this, I said, so tell me, how desperate are you to find your soulmate? And everybody right away recoils when I say that word. Desperate? I'm not desperate. Says, you're not desperate, you're not going to find it. If it's optional, you'll find every reason why not to do it, because, if you're 20 years old and you're free of band, you haven't all figured out, your life is still not, if you're 40, 50 years old, and I'm not saying that in a negative way, you already have a life experience. And if it's optional, what happens when something's optional? If it's not perfect, I'm not doing it. You already have a life without it. I'm not suggesting a person cannot or deserves not to find the right person later on. I'm just saying you need more desperation then. But I don't mean negative desperation. Because desperation, right away people say, I'm not desperate. I don't want to be desperate. Desperate is for people who are running for their lives. I mean desperate, it's not optional. Desperate means, yeah, positive desperation. And I know for myself, I work in different matters. When I'm desperate, when there's a crisis, and I'm desperate, I mean, I'm using the word in my own way, as you can imagine. That's when I get the most done. When it's optional, okay, I'll do it tomorrow. Recently, some events that's connecting to our organization and the work we do. The fire is burning, you suddenly feel, hey, this is serious. You got to do something. That's when you act. So my friends, it's healthy to develop a healthy element of desperation. It's not nothing to be afraid of. The reason we're afraid of it is because the word desperate makes us feel weak or vulnerable or needy or like, what do you mean? I'm not complete without it? Yeah. So what? Exactly that true? If you're a creative person, for example, you're not complete until you create. And when you create and that's gone, you need to create again. That's what's called the drive and the motivation to grow. So from a tree we learn these ideas. Now obviously if you have strong roots and you have a strong foundation and you have a strong network, like roots, what's a root? No tree has one root. The roots branch out, it's a network. Why? Why can't one root just go find water? Because you got to, you can't put your eggs in one basket. You have to diversify. You need to go every direction possible. Because you never know, maybe this one will dry up and this one that, who knows? You develop a whole network. So obviously when you have that type of foundational element, it makes it far easier to have the confidence to be desperate to grow. And I don't know if you know this, when NASA first sent the first man to space, it was in the early 60s, so it was the first time a human being would be living in zero gravity environment. Zero gravity atmosphere, I should say. So they sent, with astronauts, was not even to the moon, we're talking about in the early 60s. John Glenn was the first to orbit the Earth, but afterwards they had other astronauts. So they sent them with all kinds of experiments because no one, as I said, human beings never existed in zero gravity. So one of the things they sent with the astronauts was a plant. Yeah, it was not Tu Bishvat necessarily, but it was a plant. They sent a plant. They wanted to see what will happen to a plant in space. What will happen to it? Remember, there's no water there. So obviously they sent a plant. Fascinating thing. They came back with a plant, and lo and behold, nobody could believe it. The plant no longer looked like a plant. Roots were growing out from every angle. Because it had no sense of direction, because it's not on Earth, the roots were looking for water. So you had roots in the top and the bottom. Imagine, a plant usually, so the plant, you see the plant, and the bottom of the plant has the roots searching. Here, in outer space, the plant grew in all directions. Interesting. So in other words, you need to have that grounding, a sense of direction, a sense of focus, a focal point. That's what happened. Some of us, I see that. In our need for roots, we go everywhere. But in truth, roots belong in a certain place. They belong below you. When I say below you, means they're like the foundation element. Foundation doesn't belong on the 10th floor. The foundation belongs beneath all the floors. But that foundation, that invisible foundation, is what allows you the strength to be able to grow outward and to be resilient and to bear fruit. So trees have many lessons for us. They tell us the O. Henry story, the famous O. Henry story, where the guy was on his deathbed and he was succumbing to his illness, and he noticed a beautiful tree out the window. But the seasons was changing. The tree was beginning to shed its leaves. So as people do, they get fixated on an object, especially someone in pain and counting his last days. So he's looking at the tree. He's decided, he connected his lot, his destiny with the tree. As every leaf would fall from the tree, he saw another leaf of his own life dying. And to him was the day the last leaf of the tree will fall, that's the day that he will die. And and people, as we know, in healing and in illness and in medicine, a lot has to do with your own optimism. When you have someone who has no, God forbid, in the hospital, and has no visitors, has no guests, has no family to visit, it has a very negative effect, demoralizing effect. You give up the fight. You have people who come to you and they love you, and they show they want you. So it's not a guarantee, but it definitely has an element that strengthens your immune system. I mean, this is proven today. Proven. Which, of course, adds a whole dimension to the mitzvah of Bikkur Cholim in Judaism. There's the mitzvah of actually visiting the sick. Visit the sick, it's a mitzvah. We learn it from God. God went to visit Abraham when he was healing from the circumcision. And the Talmud says that when you visit the sick, you take away a 60th of their illness. So when I was a little kid, my father once took me, we went to visit someone in the hospital, and my father told me, when you visit the sick, you take away the 60th. So me, the smart aleck, I asked him, okay, so that means if you visit him 60 times, will he get healed? So my father said, you'll get older, you'll understand. Okay. Obviously, what does it mean? No, it doesn't. It's not quantity. But I understand it in a very profound way. Yes, you do. You take away 60 of the illness, it means that you alleviate. And it could help a person actually heal better. Anyways, this guy's lying in his bed, watching the tree. Every day the tree, the leaves. He had a visitor, a neighbor. I remember the O. Henry story. It was a neighbor? Yeah. I think it was little Gale. Who was an artist. Anyway, he realized that this guy is waiting for the last leaf, so he decided to go outside, and he painted a leaf on the tree. He painted a leaf. So even when all the leaves fell, there was one leaf that remained. And he would come in every day to see this guy who kept looking at this leaf, and he was waiting for it to fall, but it would never fall because it was a painted leaf. He didn't know. And I don't even remember, O. Henry always has a twist at the end. I don't even remember what the end of it is. Anybody remembers? Doesn't really matter. I like the idea, and I hope he lived forever, like the leaf. I think he finds out at the end something. I don't recall what the end of the story is. Does anybody remember the O. Henry story? But it doesn't matter. The point I want to make is, so here was a tree that was keeping him alive. We have so lessons in life. God sends us messages. People often say, where's God when I need him most? I pray to God, and my prayer is being answered. The Shalah says something very powerful about prayer. He says every prayer is answered. The fact that you don't see the answer, maybe there's 10 doors that have to be opened, and every prayer opened one door. So you need 10 more, or 9 more, or 100 doors. Everything is answered. And also, it's not always answered the way you think it should be answered. It could be answered, first of all, God could say no, or God can give you what you need, not what you think you need. Another approach. The point is that, and finally I should add, that sometimes God gives you what you need and what you even want. However, you're not ready to receive it. You have no container. Like say a person says, I want to have parnas, a livelihood. So where's your basket? You need a basket to hold it. Maybe God gives it to you and it spills all over because you have nothing to hold it. You pray for a shidduch, and then you lock yourself up in a basement, or you do self-destructive behavior. So obviously God may have sent you the person, and you just ignored it. So there's many ways to look at this picture, but when we ask for lessons, sometimes it comes to you in very strange ways. It could be a taxi driver, or it could be a tree. I don't see any trees out this window. I guess Fifth Avenue, the trees are gone, long gone. But once upon a time, this was a wilderness, before human beings turned it into concrete and metal and glass and all that. Right? So you can imagine there were trees everywhere. And now we've gotten rid of them. We leave a little room for them in a little hole, concrete, just for our own pleasures. But trees have tremendous lessons for us, because they teach us about ourselves. They teach us about the roots we need. They teach us about the ability to blossom and grow, and all the other factors that I spoke earlier. So sometimes that's what you need. You simply go and watch. Next time you need something, just go to Central Park or wherever you find a tree, and just observe it. This may be God speaking to you. Your mirror image. And try to find out what areas of your life are aligned to this tree and what areas are not. Now, I don't think anybody is lacking all of it, but a tree's, all its elements are necessary. From the roots, through the trunk, through the branches, through the roots, as I mentioned, and the fruits, and everything else that a tree represents. So when we stand on Rosh Hashanah Ilanis, which is tonight and tomorrow, and we honor the birthday of trees, the Rosh Hashanah of trees, of the new year of trees, it's a new year of our own tree-like personalities. The ability to grow, the ability to bear fruit. Because there's no greater two things in life than those two elements. And sadly, as I said, one of the saddest things is to see the constrictions that some of us have to endure, the challenges. And I believe that a person who feels pain from their own being constricted and so on is a tremendous tool if you know how to tap into it. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's a tool. It's a tool because it wakes you up. It does not let you rest. It's far worse when you become happy with a painful situation and you don't even feel it anymore. You know, like that doctor after a guy suffered a stroke, and every day he would come and stick needles into him to see if he feels it. He never felt it. One day, months later, he sticks a needle and the guy starts yelling. And the doctor starts laughing. He says, "Why are you laughing?" "I'm yelling." He says, "Yeah, because till now you haven't felt it." So the sensitivity to feel pain and to feel desperate is actually a blessing. If you channel it toward the right direction, which means to find the right people and to find the support and to find whatever it takes to help get through that. And sometimes it ends up being really desperation, I have to say that. You just must have it. If you must have it, that's when things happen. You see, God forbid, nobody should ever know, but crimes of crisis. You know, people who are very, very busy, and then suddenly there's a crisis in the family, and suddenly they have time. I mean, they have time. They make time, because it's important. It's life and death, something danger, something else. It's far harder to find people doing the same thing in a positive way. We always wait. Crisis, crisis. You know, crisis, crisis. You have no choice. God forbid there was an accident. God forbid there's a disease, an illness. The question is, can we find that same sense of urgency without waiting for a disease or negative stuff? You know, Leonard Cohen sings that, what does he sing? He says, "Thank God for the cracks, because that's how the light gets in." You know, yes, cracks in life is how light gets in. But do we have to wait for cracks? That's the nature of things. When you're comfortable, comfort zone, as much as we love comfort, is definitely not a force for change. Change does not happen when you're in a comfort zone. Now, I'm not suggesting, God forbid, anyone should not be comfortable. I'm suggesting to impose upon ourselves discomfort, healthy discomfort, before there's unhealthy discomfort. The Rebbe Rashab once said something, the fifth Chabad Rebbe said something to a chassid. It's a very powerful line. In a book called Torah Shalom, he said that life breaks all people. I'm paraphrasing, but this is the gist of it. Life breaks all people. Better break yourself before you're broken. Because when you're broken, meaning not self-initiated, it's sometimes unrachmanis, which means it's unlimited, it's without compassion, meaning that it can be very destructive. And that's very true. It's like, going back to the trees, imagine a reed in the wind, or it doesn't have flexibility, that you resist any time something challenges you. Some things will overwhelm you and they'll break you. The power of a tree is its resilience. It's similar to, I don't know if you know this, but in engineering, they call we call them suspension bridges. No, there's solid bridges, there's suspension. A suspension bridge is like Manhattan Bridge, Brooklyn Bridge, Williamsburg Bridge, Verrazano. I mean, most bridges in New York are suspension bridges. Suspension bridges you can see by the wires. You see it by the two main, usually 2 or 3 main pillars. A suspension bridge is an unbelievable feat in engineering. And I think it even came as a fluke by some engineer who figured out. A suspension bridge, if you walk on any of these bridges, those bridges shake. The first time you walk, I remember I was a kid in camp, I walked on the bridge shook, and I remember the counselor telling us that's very healthy. Because the bridge would not shake, it would crumble. The feat of engineering there is it uses its so-called resilience to be able to absorb far more weight than had the bridge been a very solid bridge. So logic would say, hey, you want a bridge to hold up tons and tons and tons, build it stronger, make a stronger foundation, make stronger pillars, dig it deeper, and so on. No. The beauty of a suspension bridge is that it allows itself to sway, not sway in extremes, but it has a certain resilience. This is now how buildings are built in Los Angeles and San Francisco and wherever there are faults, more potential earthquakes, because the building should have that flexibility. The World Trade Center, they built now in that fashion as well. They build a certain element of movement that should there be a serious impact or trauma to the building, it will be able to absorb a lot more. The essence of martial arts is based on this. Most of us think of strength in the Western world. Strength is how much gunpowder, how much what's the word? How much what?
Caliber of the gun?
Yeah, caliber. Also, not just caliber. What do I want to say? How much gunpowder? How much? Like type of how much gunpowder we have. Yeah. Martial arts are built on using the other person's energy against them and to give you energy. So, I'm sorry?
Arsenal?
You can use that, fine. So for example, like you have someone like say in boxing, so you punch somebody. But if you're able to like let that other person ride on that person's energy and give it back to them, you have a lot more power. It's similar to home run hitters, baseball hitters who, when there's a fastball, they hit the ball far faster than they do with another type of pitch, because the speed that's coming toward them, actually they use when they hit it right. They could strike out, but they could also, if they capture that speed, becomes their asset as well. So it's learning how to use energy that comes your way, deflecting it or feeding it back, and that's a big part of this type of approach. So the key is, when it comes psychologically speaking, emotionally speaking, when a person has that type of desperation, that type of pain, yes, it often is debilitating, but if it's turned the right way, it can become a powerful force of energy. That's why I say resilience. The problem that we have is we get trapped by it itself, because it causes us to distort our way of thinking. It itself causes us to make us feel weaker, make us feel more locked in, more stubborn, and more trapped in the situation itself. So these are the challenges that we have, and there's always a solution. The question is where to find it. And sometimes, they say sometimes a person has to hit rock bottom. And I don't believe that one has to hit rock bottom, to be honest. I think people can wake up before that. But the fact of the matter is that it's usually the cracks, the discomfort that causes some change, is a catalyst for change. So to go back to our discussion here, yes, Rosh Hashanah Leilanos, it's a new year for trees, Arbor Day, similar to the concept of Arbor Day. And trees offer us tremendous lessons, both in the rootedness of our lives as well as our expansion and our growth. So, I just want to conclude by saying that one of the most important, maybe the most important principle of all, is in Jewish thought, is that each of us is here not by accident. If you're here, exist right now on this earth, you were chosen to be here. And there's no greater dignity to a person's life than to know that you were chosen by God to be here today, here and now, in this generation, in this time. Everything else is secondary to that. Because if you think that way, that why was my soul sent to this earth, you think in terms of what's the purpose of my life. I find that when people are able to access that consciousness, that has the that's the most powerful counterforce to most difficulties in life. I recall when, after my book Toward a Meaningful Life was published, a number of years afterwards, someone shared with me a story about how that book saved a woman's life. So the fellow that told me was from Chicago, and he had gone to visit to his mother, who was in the hospital and, according to the doctors, dying in Toronto. My book had just been published a year before that, so he brought along a book and he gave it to his mother. Now she couldn't read well because she was very sick and was hard for her to read. So she asked him, why don't you read some sections of the book? So he asked her, what sections would you like me to read? So she asked him to read the table of contents. And as you know, the book, as you may know, the book is structured around cycles of life. 3 sections: personal, social, and theological, God. So she asked him to read the chapter on pain and suffering, because that's what she was in, a state of pain and suffering. She was in deep pain. And she also asked him to read the chapter on education, because when she was in her career was an educator most of her life. Now I should add that At that point, she had already signed a DNR because her pain was so great, she was actually asking the doctors to already let her just die. I think she was even asking that they should do something to let her die because she was just in such pain. Anyway, he was there in her room, so he began to read these 2 chapters. And a few things jumped out at her because she stopped him. One about education and the other in the chapter on pain and suffering. In the chapter on pain and suffering, the point that got her was this. It says there that if you calculate your life, if you had to make like 2 columns of the positive things in your life and the negative things, very often the negative list will be longer. Most of us probably can list more trauma and grievances and grief and losses and so on than positive. So if you think about it mathematically, hey, if the negative list is longer than the short list, why is it worth living? From a business point of view, that's a loss. You have 5 positive things and 50 negative, or 50 positive and 100 negative. That's what the book talks about. It says that's if you look at life quantitatively. But if you look at life qualitatively, that your life has a purpose, and everything, including your challenges, your pains, are also part of the purpose. It's a different way of looking at it. Then everything has value. It's not like measuring the negative and the positive. Everything is important for you to experience. That was one thing. In the chapter on education, it talked about the sacred work of an educator. That an educator is not just someone who was a teacher to students for a little while, but shapes their lives forever. Because what you experience with a good educator is that educator will forever stay with their students. And so it's like education doesn't end. The seeds that are planted by the educator bear fruits forever and ever. That was the gist of it. After he finished reading, this woman suddenly got this surge of energy. She called the doctors in. She said, call the doctors. She says, I do not want to die. I will deal with this pain. As long as I'm on this earth, I will fight it. And it was these messages that she suddenly, reawakened in her, the will, and realized that life is more complicated than just my comfort right now or not. Interesting thing happened. She recovered. And the doctors all attributed to that moment where she suddenly had this surge of will, which is not something you can predict and not something you can even administer. It's not a medication. It was a will. Something struck her. She realized the gift of life. She realized that she had been an educator. Her life was not worthless. So I heard the story from the son. So it's a tremendous lesson in life. Now I understand it's easier said than done. Someone who's in pain will say, well, listen, I don't feel that way. But sometimes you have to step back. So plant the seed. And each of us has that type of dignity. This is the ultimate answer. That no matter what breaks us in life, there's even a stronger power that can build us. And like they say, if something can be broken, it can be fixed. And this is the essence of what Jewish thought teaches. Obviously, it's a godly power, but then healing itself is godly. Why don't we just get sick and die? How can we heal? Because it's more complicated. We have resilience. We have healing powers. There's a certain built-in healing process. You ask doctors that are humble, they'll tell you about the magical, miraculous healing powers of a human body. And a doctor facilitates it, doesn't cause it, facilitates it. Gets it going, gets rid of the resistance, helps spark the healing power. But it's the body that heals. So, let me wish everybody this 15th of I guess you say Good Yontif or not, a holiday. We say Happy Rosh Hashanah to all the trees. So if you see any trees on your way home, wish them a happy holiday. And maybe study them a bit and say, here are some lessons. What better way to honor this day than by learning a lesson from a tree and saying, let me learn something from you. I think it's better than the trees learning lessons from us. We're far more messed up. So trees can be tremendous lessons, and I want to wish everybody to not have to deal with the pain and the desperate negative stuff, but it's also part of the whole saga of our lives. And everyone should only have a peaceful and a beautiful life, and that the catalyst for growth should come from a positive desperation, not from negative desperation. And please see us at the Meaningful Life as serving every way possible to help us all live, as the name implies, suggests, meaningful lives. Thank you very much. I want to just conclude by saying Philip will be giving his class tomorrow, I believe. So anyone wants the information, just email us. And if you haven't left us your email address, please do so. And I wish everybody both here and online a very pleasant week, and a week of growth and bearing fruit into perpetuity. Be well. Bye-bye.